It is 9 o'clock on the West Coast. So, welcome everyone to the final Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group meetup of 2025. Super happy to have my friend Marco here to be talking to us a little bit about Excel madness. But before we get into that, we're going to do our usual thing of thanking the sponsors. But before we even do that, I do want to just quickly throw out an acknowledgement, a big congratulations to our friend Jeremy Early, who last night won the Excel World Championships in Las Vegas. An amazing guy who just honestly looks at Excel differently, I think, than the rest of us do. Congratulations to him, well deserved. I understand he got a perfect score with much time left over to sit back and actually just, relax and watch everything else that was going on. So crazy stuff. Good job, Deb. All right, now let's talk about what we got going on here today. So first thing I want to do is say a quick thanks to the sponsors, skillwave.training, which is my training company. We teach you how to be awesome with Excel and Power BI. If you are interested in getting better in either of those two technologies, you should definitely check out our courses. Excel Guru is the parent company of Skillwave and also the creator and distributor of Monkey Tools to help you build better Excel solutions faster. Our next meetups we have coming up. Well, January 8th is going to be a surprise. I'll let you know about it a little bit closer to the time, but we're going to have someone super, super exciting and awesome here. For our Power BI track coming up, I'm actually really shocked by this, but I've never actually had Reza Rad on our show. I have had Layla, his wife, who's unfortunately no longer with us, before, but I'm super excited to be welcoming Reza to come and talk about something related to Power BI. He hasn't told me what it's going to be yet. I'm sure it'll be amazing, but there we go. So good stuff coming up. Those RSVP meetups are open for RSVP now. Our Cyber Week sale ends tomorrow. So we have some great deals on things like Monkey Tools licenses, 20% off an annual license or 15% off a lifetime license. We also have great deals on our courses, 25% off all of our SkillWave courses as well. So if you're looking to do your upskilling, don't forget to go and take advantage of these offers in the next 24 hours. As far as Monkey Tools goes, I haven't been able to put any new features into Monkey Tools in the last little bit here, but I do want to just sort of call out that we do have a free using Monkey Tools course. It's 100% off for Black Friday and even after that, honestly. This will teach you everything you need to know about Monkey Tools, where the features are, what they do, and what's actually available in free and pro. No risk to this one, so I definitely recommend you check this out and learn what this tool can do for you. We also have started selling now individually from our courses an Ask Ken Anything license or subscription to our Ask Ken Anything products. This is a fantastic session. Just did one of these yesterday. I think we had a lot of people in there. Actually, it was great. 2 hours of fantastic questions and answers and just great community chat actually with all the people that were there. I highly recommend this if you're getting stuck with anything you need to do for work and you're just looking to bounce this off an expert and and his posse of friends that are also there as well. This is a great place to come and actually check out. So definitely take a look into what we have in our Ask Ken Anything subscriptions. I should mention they're also included in our Excel Fundamentals Academy. If you've got someone in your organization that needs to upskill to get their Excel from a beginner to an intermediate level, or maybe you feel that you've got a lot of knowledge gap holes to fill out, this is a 30-hour training program. It's got lots of great stuff that goes from the very basics of Excel all the way through to pivot tables and data visualization and Power Query. It includes access to our Ask Ken Anything sessions. It's a great tool to get you at a very, very comfortable level to go and build some amazing things in Excel and start saving yourself some time doing it. Of course, if you already feel you're ready to you got all that nailed and you're ready to move past it, that's where our Self-Service BI Academy comes in. This is where we teach you Power Query, Power Pivot, Power BI, DAX, all kinds of good stuff. Includes our Ask Ken Anything sessions, includes my book, includes my software, includes the Excel Fundamentals Academy as well. It's a huge offer here. Don't forget, it's 25% off until the end of tomorrow. Just want to say that this meetup, along with all meetups, is recorded and hosted on the SkillWave YouTube channel. It will be posted within 24 hours. So if you have bounced early and want to pick up on the things that Marco is going to be talking about because you missed something, you can always check it out there. We will post on Meetup to let you know it's there. Of course, if you subscribe to the channel, you'll probably even get notified before that. The second to last thing I'm going to say here is if you would like to come and speak to our user group, we would love to have you. We're always interested in welcoming new people. If you want to talk about Excel or anything related to the Power Platform, Power BI, Power Automate, whatever, we would love to get in touch with you on this one here. Just reach out through the link here. This is included in the slides that have already been posted on the Meetup site. We'll get in touch with you. We'll get you on our stage. And at that, that's my bit. So, Marco, welcome to the stage, my friend.
Thank you, Ken.
What do you got for us today?
Yeah, so thank you, for having me, tonight or today, depending on where you are. And I see many familiar faces, so thank you for, tuning in. I will basically talk about how to basically survive when we need to talk with all of our clients, especially talking from a consultant perspective. I think that it's very tough when we try to do a lot of stuff and then we try to basically juggle many things. This is something that we also discuss, with you, Ken, in some occasions, just to see, okay, but what can we do when we need to work? But we need to also account for the different kind of skills and everything else. So the name started because maybe you know about this. There is a movie called In the Mouth of Madness that is a movie that I really like. And so I thought that in the Excel of madness is how we feel sometimes when we work with people in Excel. So that's something that I thought made a lot of sense. And that's why this is the name also of my presentation. So I am called Marco Filocamo, as you have guessed, probably, as this is probably, I don't know, the fourth time that I say my name tonight. But I am a Microsoft Excel Most Valuable Professional, and I have a website called Like Me, that is www.marcofilocamo.it. As you guessed, my content is in Italian mostly, so I create guides, different cases about, Excel mostly, and this is where most of my content is. So I really like to do training and consulting in Excel, as some of the other speakers of the meetup as well. And tonight, I think that I will share with you some of the approaches that I use also when I need to work with clients. So the first thing is that I want to share with you something, and this is something that I always say when I start some training courses, right? So we have a very tough way of looking into things inside of Excel, because in most cases when we find a solution, then we want to stick to that kind of solution, right? We create something that is cool and then we want to stick with it. We don't want to change that much. And the problem is that sometimes we are just stuck in our own ways, even though we don't know about it, right? So in my case, I use this, and I say that this is the Pier Giorgio way of life. Pier Giorgio is a common Italian name, but it's used because in that way I can basically use this as a way of saying, if you do something inside of Excel and you think that you're doing this, I don't know, 100 times, and you should be doing that, I don't know, 3 times, and then just stop and say, how is it possible that there is not a faster way of doing that, right? As a way of improving, I think that in that case, you may ask yourself, am I Pier Giorgio in this case, right? So the idea is also the fact that when we are at the consultant level, this is one of the issues, like we keep on doing the stuff in the same way. And also sometimes clients are just really resistant to change. So this is also one of the issues. I'm pretty sure that you're all excited about, the big reveal, but basically it's like being like a dinosaur that just goes on its way. Like, Pier Giorgio doesn't care. Pier Giorgio just goes straight. He never use tables. He never use Power Query. He doesn't care. She doesn't care about anything and just goes on with its way, right? This is one of the problems, though. We cannot really reuse our solutions. Even when we try to do that, we always need to think about, okay, what's the chance to improve what we have done up until that moment? What can we learn from what we did before, right? So tonight you will see these kind of dinosaurs, popping up because, Pier Giorgio is not really like the most advanced user. And the fact is that we can also be Pier Giorgio in some cases, right? So it's not like we are only working with dinosaurs. The risk is that we become dinosaurs ourselves when maybe we do something else instead, right? When I do bureaucracy, when I work with invoices, I'm very slow. It takes a lot of time. So, everybody can be Pier Giorgio, but this can be one of the issues, right? So when you work with people inside of Excel, I think that this is something that we need to think about. So are we sticking to some old habits, or are we trying to create something new? And this goes also into saying that sometimes we complain about how do we work with clients, right? But I think that the problem is, in some cases, the expectation, how we choose clients, right? So I put a checklist because I think that tonight you are going to have some people that maybe want to become, a consultant. They want to do something that is not only training inside of Excel. And I can give you some ideas into what I do, actually, okay? And this is something that I think is important because if you don't put some kind of list, if you don't have a checklist, if you don't have some rules, it's going to be very tough to actually find the balance, right? So this is something that is not easy to do anyway as a freelance, but I will show you something. For example, do they have Excel 365? If they don't, I don't want to work with them. So if you then struggle because you keep on creating formulas that need to be, retrofitted and then need to be compatible with, 2003, maybe that's your market. It's not mine. So you need to define, what do you want to do? Like, do you really want to work for this kind of company? Do you think that it makes sense if you're an expert into dynamic arrays and Power Query and lambdas and whatever? I don't know. I will find that absolutely frustrating. So if I think about my ideal client, they need to have Excel in the version 365. Maybe they don't know anything about Power Query, but when you talk about Power Query, are they completely shocked? Like they want to use it, like they understand the power behind Power Query or not? This is also one of the problems. If they say, no, but I like to have the stuff on my desktop and this is amazing, and then a colleague of mine copies and pastes the stuff and then he sends me, which is like a nightmare scenario for me, I would just say, yeah, but can we do this in a proper way? Can we use a structure? Can we use some kind of system? If you see that they are resistant to that, maybe it's a very interesting company. I don't think that they can become my clients. The other thing is that, do they actually use SharePoint? Like, do they have a concept of where are the files? Like, do they use a cloud system? Do they use something? Because if they don't, it's going to tell you that probably either you're going for something that is cheap, so you're going for a very small company, but then you will reach a threshold when it doesn't really move the needle. And maybe you have many clients, but it doesn't really work, I think. So even in that case, having an idea about, some clouds and something like that, I think that it makes a lot of sense. Or at least knowing that they have structure, right? It can also not be SharePoint, but if it's not, then we really need to understand, okay, what are they using then? Because if they don't use any kind of system, working with them is going to be very, very tough, especially thinking about Power Query, right? If you don't know where the data is, how can you actually use Power Query in a certain way? So this is something also that I think for me is quite important. This makes everything easier. Is there a fast way to communicate with them? Like if I want to talk with them, do they actually give me some ways to actually interact with them? If they don't, if I need to send an email, if I need to update them all through emails, etc., it gets very tiring. I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my time, reviewing all of this. So I think that having a direct line of communication is also quite important. It's going to create some issues at the start, but then it's going to be much easier then to communicate and to work with them. So I think that this is also something that I like. So for example, if you say, okay, I want to use Teams, I want to use Slack, I want to use Signal, I want to use whatever, okay, I can try to accommodate that, but it makes a lot of sense. So, for example, if you say that the solution needs to work on Mac, as some people are asking in the chat, maybe it's not going to be part of the recording, so I want to share that. For me, that's a no. Like, I really don't want to work with Mac. Like, it's something that I find very frustrating. I don't know the environment. I know something about the nuances, but it gets very complicated. So yeah, thank you, Mike. But yeah, no, for me, it's not something that I would like to do.
Send them to me, Marco.
Yeah. Okay. So we can have a collaboration going then. But then also, like, are you sure that you got it right? Because in some cases, I don't think that it makes a lot of sense to be always training on the job, right? This can happen, but if you're not able to translate what they wanted and then you say yes, then this is going to be problematic. So are you sure that you got it correctly? If you work with multiple companies that are in different businesses, they may think about something that is completely different. So in my case, when you use some KPIs, some acronyms or something like that, I found it very complicated to understand what they wanted to do. So that's why people actually specialize in banking or finance or whatever, because in that way they understand the lingo and it's much easier. So I think that this is something that makes sense. And then, are you sure that you can do it? If you come to me and you say, I am a Power BI expert, I want to do some more, detailed Power BI and DAX stuff. I'm not your guy, absolutely. I want to use some Power Automate with Office script and do this and this and that. I have no clue what you're saying. So in that case, I mean, be honest about it. Even with AI, okay, we can just, pretend that we know stuff a bit better than we actually do, but there is a limit, right? So I think that this is also something that you need to ask yourself honestly before, right? Instead of having many clients, it's better to have a few clients that are, part of your ideal persona. Are they okay with the pricing? This is also one of the problems. when you go online, you start probably with the smaller gigs, right? So you use, Superprof, you use Upwork, you use many of these platforms. But it's a race to the bottom where it's very hard, I think, unless you are very, very, very good, like exceptional, it's going to be very hard for you to actually justify the pricing in these kind of marketplaces. So in that case, be upfront with the pricing, because the problem is that if you're not clear with the pricing, then they are going to just inundate you with requests and it's going to be very complicated. So even though you are going to lose a few clients, it's much better to have a few high-paying clients instead of a whole crowd that, that doesn't really give you much. So I think that this is something that I also think about. If they ask for discounts, it's already something that I don't really like that much. I followed this course when they told me, yeah, Marco, if they ask you for a discount, just say that they can add a 0 and go, to Deloitte, which I don't know. It doesn't really seem to be that nice of a response, but it can make sense, right? So in that case, okay, they want to play, this kind of game with you. I think that it creates some kind of, difficult relationships. Did we make it clear that last minute means that I won't do it, right? This is something that you need to be very clear on. If you want to survive as a consultant, this doesn't need to happen, okay? Because otherwise it makes no sense. Like if you have people that are writing to you at, 11 p.m. because they have urgent stuff and whatever, I skip them. I tell them straight away, it's going to take a few business days and that's it, right? Unless there is something that is, I don't know, like gigantic problem that, maybe there's going to be a presentation on the next day to the CEO for a, billion-dollar company that needs to invest based on your own model and the model just exploded for some reasons. But it's a very edge case. And apart from that, I always push back. I'm just saying, okay, this wasn't part of what we said. It's going to take a few days. And even though it can be easy, but if you do that in 10 minutes, they will expect that everything can be done very quickly. And it doesn't really work in my case. So in this case, I think that with the pricing, with also understanding, some expectation, also Ken is saying that if the rate is a problem, yes, absolutely. Like if they start negotiating with you with the rate, creates a kind of there is a bad taste in your mouth afterwards. So unless you really ask for an amount of money that is, nonsense. But I think that in this case, it's going to be much easier. It's going to be very hard to do all of this when you start out. But do they understand that we are in charge, right? You also have people from the company that will going to tell you, yes, but I am an expert in Excel. I know everything about Excel. I'm pretty good in Excel. I remember a presentation from Ken in London where he asked to this crowd of people that are, Excel people. And he wanted to rate them all and to say, okay, how good are you in Excel? And everybody just stayed around 7, 7 on a scale from 1 to 10, if I remember correctly. So if you go to people and they assume that they are as good as you are, but you are an Excel consultant, you should be much, much better, it gets very, very complicated, I think. Like if you have a person inside that then says, yeah, but I know about this stuff, I know about Excel, unless you have some kind of stuff going on, this can also be a problem. So be careful about this because this can be a very huge problem. And then this is not a non-negotiable, I think, but think about, okay, do I like the job? Because if they don't want to use Power Query, they complained about the pricing, they know there is a person inside that is considered to be like a genius, you don't like the industry, you need to travel because they don't want to do stuff online. I mean, do you really want to take it? I can understand that movie directors take do some movies because in that case they can do movies that they like, right? So sometimes they do some blockbusters so that they can do more niche stuff. But in our case, it's a bit more complicated. So this is my checklist. Basically, you can steal some of it, but the idea is that you have some non-negotiables. You need to have them. This is taken, from a scene from a TV show called The Bear that maybe you have watched. And you know that it doesn't really work that much in the TV show, but I think that it's a concept that we need. If you want to survive client requests and not get, surrounded by the madness, I think that it makes a lot of sense in this case. So there is a question, do you prefer time and materials or fixed price or value-based? In my case, for example, I always use some fixed price that is based on the number of hours that it's going to take. So for me, it's going to be This is also on my website, so it's very easy. But you say, in a certain month, there is going to be, you have 3 possibilities based on the number of hours that I will be working for you, right? So for me, when I work with a client, I say, this project is going to take this amount of hours. And so it's going to be much easier for me to say, it's going to be 3 months with this price, and this is going to be the total. So in that case, I think that it's a bit easier. Like in my case, but I'm talking about the Italian market, it's easier to say you have a certain amount of hours that are going to be used to create this and this and that, right? Because otherwise, in some other cases, they don't really, like in the other case, they really tend to negotiate more. They say, yeah, but why does it take, 5,000 euros to create something like that? So in that case, it's much easier in that case. So you have, but really, I am very adamant about prices. You can see them on my website, as mentioned. Not everybody does it, but it's much easier because in that way, when they come to you, they already have a threshold. They already know that they cannot pay less than that. So I have less people reaching out, yes, but it's not something that is bad, in my opinion, right? So in that case, I know that I can work with very good companies. And then when I go to Excel, what can I do with Excel, right? So there is a very simple structure that I use when I try to create something, like a dashboard. I will show you some examples afterwards. But the idea is that if you want to do something that is with modern Excel, you should do something that is cool, right? So something that you have fun, because otherwise, if it's not fun, it's not idea, right? If I work with somebody that doesn't want to use dynamic arrays, you need to pay me like very, very substantial amount of money to do that. So in my case, it's a very simple one. If you think about it, you just start with arrays. So dynamic arrays are basically the core of everything that I do, at least when we talk about something that is not, Power Query. So we're talking about the last part, right? But arrays are something that you need to master if you really want to become a consultant. I had people reaching out to me and saying, yeah, but I'm pretty good with Excel. Then they show me some stuff, they're not good enough. And the fact is that they don't use dynamic arrays enough. We don't need to be, world champions. Like, we don't need to be Dim. We don't need to be, Boribodon or some other people that are just absolutely crazy with the lambdas. But at least knowing that we can create everything only with arrays. So everything is actually dynamic. If it doesn't work, if it's a mix of different stuff, it doesn't really work. So in that case, it's arrays. Then you have the headers, which is something pretty easy. And then everything else goes on top in my case. So KPIs, filters, slicers, recap, charts, checkboxes, whatever you like. But the idea is that in that case, you have enough space to work. So you know that arrays are not going to be, that space is not going to be used by other people. They are not going to put some comments on some other stuff because it's going to be on top of that. So this is something that is just a very simple map, but I think that is going to help you if you want to create something complicated. It always makes sense to start with the arrays and then not to mix different kind of stuff, right? So there is the part, with arrays, then you have the others, and then you have whatever you want on top. And this is where I think that there is another concept that I think is interesting. Strategy against tactics. We are very good at, tactics, because this is a quote taken from, Savielli Tartakover. He was a very famous chess player, grandmaster, and he's also famous because of his quotes. I really like them. But basically, the idea is that we are very good with the tactics. So we know what to do when there is something to do. So our mind starts thinking, okay, we need to create an array, we need to use Power Query, we need to do blah, 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 okay? But the fact is that sometimes we don't go back to the strategy side. So knowing what to do when there is nothing to do, right? So I think that when you think about, even when you train, it's mostly about tactics, but we miss the strategy sometimes. So when you create a solution, it makes sense to then go back even in time, even 6 months time. Now we know that everything is going very, very quickly, right? But in a few months, tactics may change, but the strategy doesn't really change, that much. But you need to find your balance between the two. You need to find your checklist, and you need to find also your process, right? I think that I invented nothing new, right? So, but when I work with clients, I say, okay, I want to start with some kind of topic. So what do you want to do with this data? I mean, why did you come to me? Where is the data? So you talk about the sources, like, and this is where you keep on asking, okay, are you using cloud services? Are you using something else instead? Is the data ready to use, right? Because I think that it's very complicated. Like, if you have data that is coming from multiple sources, then if they don't know where the sources are, then I think that this is going to be very, very much, complicated. So this is also something that I want to understand, especially if there are people that have created some manuals. As you know, if you have done some consulting jobs, do you have people that created sheets, like complete files, when they explain you what you need to do, right? So I don't know, 100 steps of copy this and paste into that, etc. It's already better than not having anything, but it's not a great sign. In that case, you can work with Power Query, but it's a sign. And then you work with the tables. So you need to also share with the client the concept of tables, because people are not using tables, right? In most cases, they aren't, at least. So that's the part that is not probably the one that is, the sexiest, right? So when you talk about data, it's mostly about, visualizations and, stuff done by many people, right? So, John Peltier, Roberto Mesa, Carlos Barbosa, you may know few of these people, but in that case, or even, so Laura that actually presented, at this same meetup some months ago. But the fact is that if you don't really have good pillars, like if you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't know where the sources are, if you don't know how to clean the data, which kind of tables you're going to use, the analysis is going to be a terrible experience, right? So I think that it makes sense to just stop for a second when you get a job and really understand, okay, do I want this job or not? And then see everything else and have your own approach, right? Mine is done in this way. So there is a part that is based on the pre-processing. Then I look at the tables inside of Excel, because I mostly do stuff in Excel. So I'm not an expert about anything else. And then I do the analysis and then the output. In the output, I just tell them that it's cool to have at least some key actions, some next steps, and whatever. I don't work too much in the data storytelling side of things. It's a very fascinating part, but they don't come to me for that reason, right? So if you want to do Excel, if you want to become a consultant with Excel, focus on Excel. Don't say that you can do everything, because it doesn't really work in this kind of market. It's better to be known as something where you are the expert, okay? So this is something that happens before we actually start, with our case. But Ken was also saying inside of the chat that, in this case, we can have, some other, I mean, there can be some variations here, right? But it's up to you. Like if you just use a blank, like a blank sheet, then it's going to be much easier for you to understand how you want to do stuff. So that's why I highly recommend to have A3 a paper or something like this, because in that way it's going to be easier for you just to work with this. So you need to have a strategy, you need to have an approach, and that's going to be the easiest way, I think, for you to work. And I will show you now some cases. So let's say that we have a table done in this way. Okay, I created this much to Ken dismay with, Copilot. But basically I created a table when we have some products, there is a brand, there are some sizes, some type of the same, product. Then we have an ID, price, cost. Basically, then we have the storage for all of this. So we have basically all the data that is here. So we have all the storage. Then we have different kind of places. So we have Denver, Miami, Seattle, and Vancouver. And for each of these, we also have a threshold. So we want to know basically how many units we have for each of these places. So storage is about having some sort of units. Threshold is the limit that we want to reach. Okay, and then the last one is going to be about sales. So it's kind of a complicated structure. We have 4 different stores together. So it's not ideal in this case, because of course we will think about, okay, let's go for a pivot, let's go for something else. In this case, they want to see the data in this way, so we just keep it as it is. Okay, so in that case, I think that this is basically how you can work and try to start with this. So yes, we can change the data. Sometimes we cannot, or maybe it becomes very complicated. Like if you want to do some pivot, but then they want to see the structure, then it's going to be, much harder. So for example, yes, like even if you have internal clients, yes, I think that this is very interesting. So Heather is saying in the chat that, do you want to draw like what the report looks like? Absolutely, I agree. I am the worst person. I mean, like I cannot really like draw anything, but we just need to create some boxes. It's not complicated. But when you ask, okay, what do you want to do? Like a sketch, something easy. It's the way that makes you understand, okay, is this going to be a nightmare or something cool? So I absolutely agree with you, because when they say, I want to do something that is cool to, to watch, it doesn't mean that it's the same on your end. So when you're sure on what you want to do, then this is going to be much easier. So So let's say that we want to look into this, right? So as of now, everything is the same. But if we look into what we see, we know that, okay, we have some SKU related information. So we know that this is going to be related, with the products. For example, my tables are always the same. Like I create something that is called table, like something very easy, like in this case, or, this is actually, kind of like a backup. But if you have a table and then you have everything, and generally I just have a very simple structure, and I just put some colors in the headers. Now, you can change this, I don't mind, but it works on my end. I understand if stuff is actually related, right? So of course it can come from multiple places, data model and whatever, but in this case is, okay, I want to know what I want to use afterwards, right? So in this case, we really need to understand, okay, we have some stuff about the information, then we have something odd, like we have a total, for example. This is terrible, right? So having like a total, it doesn't make sense, at least to me. So yeah, this is something that we can think about. Then we have storage, then we have threshold, and then we have sales. So this is going to be how we're going to start. And then we can see what's going to happen then, because we are going to have some questions. So when they say, for example, how can I filter by brand, right? There are multiple ways to do that. Some of the issues that I see sometimes is that when you look at training or when you look at videos, there are very cool solutions, right? So you can say, yeah, you can just go to the table and then you can insert like, like a slicer, and then you can do this and this and that and whatever. But in a real environment, when you have multiple people working on the same file, this can be problematic. So sometimes you would like to go for something like for the, I wouldn't say the shiny new thing, but something that is nice. You're going to do something that is a bit different because it's going to be harder if many people are going to use the same file. So this is also to be taken into account. You would like to do something, it doesn't mean that you can always do that, right? So in this case, my understanding is, okay, let's just use filter, right? So in this case, we're going to see multiple examples starting from this simple request and then what can we do afterwards, right? So this is the same structure that we have seen before. We are going to have the headers, like the easiest thing that you can do is just say, table headers. I think that it's a good idea to always rename the table as, TBL and then something. At least this is how I do it. And then you're going to have something where here we're just going to take back the question that we had before. And then we're going to see the number of function used. And then here we are going to have a brand. Now, this is something that I think that all of you know, right? So we can say filter, table, and then we can say when the table brand is going to be Barilla, and then this is going to be done, and this is going to be pretty easy, right? So pretty trivial. The problem is that the request will never stop here. So this is something that maybe people can use. Then they can say, yeah, this is cool. I want to use, some other stuff. I want to use some other names and whatever. Okay. And we have only one function. Filter is just an amazing function. I really like it, for example. But in this case, this is just the starting point, because what's going to happen then? This is something that happened to all of you. How can I select them easily? And now you are going to say, yes, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? So if you start here, you can see that some of these names are complicated. Like you have, for example, some seem to be repeated, you have a lot of problems and whatever. Nice. This is something that you can also do with, Power Query. But for example, here, then you're going to say, okay, I want to create some data validation, which makes a lot of sense. What happens sometimes is that you create something like this as a quick fix and you say, yeah, this is going to be something that I just need this one. So, let's just, keep it wherever and then we can see. No, you need to have a structure. You need to know, okay, if I create a data validation, if I create a list, then it's going to be somewhere else. In my case, I create something very easy. I just say all the lists are going to be here. So I can just say sort unique table brand, and this is going to be, sharing everything here. But I know that in my lists, this is where I'm going to have every kind of selection in the start from here. Because otherwise, if you just do it, and I've seen this countless times, right? So you can just go here and then you can do the same thing and then you can just copy some stuff here and then you can just have some calculation, blah, blah, blah. No, you need to be very, very rational about this stuff, right? So we have space for creativity, not for this stuff. You need to have a structure and to think, okay, if I want to work correctly, then probably I will just have a list here, right? So when we go to our second solution, then of course this is going to change. We're just going to have some data validation, and then the ideal stuff, which is something that I think I have already done, is creating also some names, right? So if you say list brands, So this is going to be, okay, I want to create a name. And so here I can just say list, and then it's going to be list brands. And in this case, we can just, select, whatever we like. So the formula is the same. It doesn't really change, but, the while effect is a bit better in this case, because of course you can say, I'm going to do the same stuff, but this is where not most, but some of the analysis stops, right? So you just say, okay, yeah, but this is going to be easy, and then everything is going to be fantastic. However, you keep on receiving requests. So, okay, this is nice and all. Data validation should be something that we use already. You know that in this case, I don't want to go too much into details. You are a pretty technical crowd, but of course, when you use something like this, list brands is done in this way, right? So you create a name, and in this case, when you say that it's a list, it's going to be B3, and then it's going to be, with the hash sign. So in that case, it's going to take everything that we have before. Now, an interesting topic is this one, though. They may say, okay, very cool, Marco, you were able to solve our problem, and then we can filter now. But how can I select all brands now? And this is like a question that seems trivial. I don't think that it's trivial at all, because the solutions that you think about are not going to be the ones that make sense to Excel, right? So if you think about it, there are multiple ways to solve this problem. I will show you some cases where this works and some cases where this really doesn't work. So, of course, I understand that it's already time for some workarounds, because it's not native, right? So if you want to use filter, it means that it's going to be all of them. Cool. So if you want to do this in a proper way, then of course you can say, if this is going to be all of them, then just select table, and let's do something else instead, right? So in this case, for example, we need to create something different. No, we need to create another list where what I do is just this. I just say this stack. This is going to be what I use for all of them. And in this case, you can always have a selection at the top that says just all, right? So in this case, I think that it makes sense to have, because it's almost the same as the previous one, but in this case, it's going to be slightly different, because it's going to be list brands. I think it's called complete in this case. So we can go there and see, and I can see some dinosaurs, popping in the chat. This is something that I really appreciate. But as you can see, I can say, yes, okay, if this is all, okay, nice. If this is going to be something like this, then it's going to be table. And if not, then we can just, filter table and then PBL, brand, and whatever. Okay, but I don't really like this that much, because I can just say brand is going to be equal to this value, and then otherwise it's going to be blank. Okay, cool, this works and all. But for example, this is something that I would be a bit cautious about. When you use if, for example, at the start of a condition, I'm not sure that I like it that much. For example, in my case, it's like you risk creating ifs, and then keep on doing that, right? So if you want to do this in a more structured way, there are other ways to do that. So for example, what we can do is think about something like this, right? So we can say, okay, filter, and then we can do something like this. And then, of course, this is going to be similar to what we did before, right? But we have a problem here, because we say, okay, I want to put, the condition here. And here, I think that the possibility of mistakes is very high. Like if you say if C5 is equal to all, then my idea would be to do something that it's like, okay, true. I can try true and say, yeah, because otherwise it's going to be this one. And then we can just close it out. And then, oh, wow, yeah, this seems to be working correctly. And then it doesn't work. Why, though? Because you need to think about how these formulas work, how dynamic arrays work, right? In this case, it's going to be only one single value, and you need to do that for all the values that you had before in your own table. So my solution is something a bit odd in this case, but if I want to keep this consistent, I can just say sequence rows of table. And I just say, in this case, this is going to be taking everything that we have. It's going to say, okay, take all of them, because basically sequence rows of table does something interesting. It does something like this. It does sequence rows of table, basically, you know that this creates like, something like this, right? So from 1, we have 137 values, right? But when you use filter, everything that is not a 0 is okay. So in that case, it's going to create something fictional. It's going to be created like this kind of sequence, and then this is going to give you some idea. So this is going to give you, this kind of values. So yes, it's a bit more complicated, but it's a bit more sound as well, because in that case, you see that it's already encapsulated inside of what you're doing. So another thing that you may want to do here is also to really explain what you're doing. So when you say, for example, okay, for example, data is in table, then we can just say condition is this one. And then you can just say, okay, final or something like this. I may change this at a certain point, but you can say condition and then final. Now, the solution is exactly the same as what you did before, right? But there is a difference between doing if this and this and that and saying, hey, this is the data, this is the condition, this is the final stuff. We are using let, we are using and tracking every step. It makes a lot of sense to me. I think that it's much better. It's longer. Yes, you need to think about yourself as well, right? When you see formulas that are if, blah, 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 it's very complicated. You can, of course, change this and say brand for, C5 and do whatever you want. But even already here, this is going to be much easier to read. I think that this is going to be much better for everything that you want to do. So when you think about this, even though you may have formulas that are longer, that are harder to be understood by the public, it's going to be easier for you because you really understand all the steps. Now, something that, of course, you can do also is explain the formula. So explanation, you say this formula takes all data in case you add, and if not, the brand you selected. And something like this. Now, I know that this is not a comment or whatever, but this is something that I like. Like sometimes I use it because they say, okay, I don't remember what I did. And this can happen. Like if you had clients that are working for you for a long time, you may want to put a comment inside, right? So you may want to do something like this. I don't really like comments. I don't like notes. Maybe you are an expert about that. I don't like it. So I would rather have something like this and say, yeah, if I go back to this, like if you want to analyze that, this is going to be much easier for you to understand, okay? So it's up to you though. This is not like a non-negotiable, but we are already at a point where this formula is way more complicated than we thought. And then we can go back and think, okay, but wouldn't have this been better working, with a pivot table? Maybe, yes. But it always depends on what they ask. So how flexible do you want to be, right? In my case, I prefer to keep a dynamic array approach because I know that they're going to ask me more and more stuff. Every time that I create something with pivot tables, at a certain point, they ask me, yeah, can we add something like this? And then it becomes like a monster, okay? So I prefer to do this in that way. But of course, I'm just telling you my story, right? So then we can go further. We can say, okay, but we can do something else instead. I want more brands, right? And so your mind will be also racing now because you're going to think, okay, but I could have used a slicer, then you could have selected 2 brands and done that. Yes, of course. But then it's a different experience. If you have multiple people working with that, it's not an option. So you can say, okay, there are multiple ways to do that. So you need to be honest with yourself and ask, quick fix or the proper way? And this is something that happens all the time when you work with Excel, right? So you can say, okay, do I want to do something that is going to survive for the future? Or do I want to do something because they ask for me, I want to be quick and I want to do that? So yeah, that's something that I need to think about, right? Because I mean, the easy way would be something like this and say, wow, yes, we can just select whatever we had before. So we can just do something like this. Then we can say, hey, okay, let the explanation, whatever. Ha! And then we can say, yeah, but or we can just say, okay, this is one of the filters, and then we can put also the other one. So we can do this twice, and then we can say, okay, the final version is going to be this one, and then there is going to be something else instead, right? So, but it's not something that you really want to do, because if you want to do that, you can just start back and say, okay, if, and then you can say or, and then you can do something like this. But this is something where, I mean, it's not like it doesn't work, but I don't like it because, okay, we can do that, right? You can say filter table if or this one is equal to this one is equal to something like this, then we can just say, the same stuff, that we did before. So we can say sequence rows table, and this is fine. And then otherwise, we can say, okay, you can just, think about something else afterwards. But here you need to know that there are some rules about it, right? So you can say, okay, if it's either one of them, then this works. And then you need to think about something. We always need to give a solution that takes all of the values inside of the table, right? So in this case, we can do something like this. We can say countif. What though? We can say countif this, and then have a look at what we have in TBL brand. And if not, just go with the blank. Why does it work in this way? I think that it's an interesting thing, for example, here, because we could do this and really just say, okay, if this is something like that, then takes all. But then how do you do this when you have multiple values, right? So it's going to be complicated. Why do you use countif in this case? Because it's something interesting. If you do something like this, like countif C5 to D5 to TBL brand, as you know, we have something that we need to do. So we need to have a value for each and every one of the rows inside of the table. In this case, we can have it, and it's just going to be 0 or 1. Each individual cell is going to be checked against C5 and D5, right? So it's not counting how many times we have any and barilla, it's counting whether inside of each row we do have these values inside, right? So this is the solution that we need to think about. So we need to count, because we always need to think that we need to have a solution for all of the different rows. Why is this cool though? Because if you have, I don't know, 5 of them, it doesn't really change. You can just add other, lists here, and you can just do this for 5. Otherwise, it's going to be, okay, filter, and then it's going to be filter inside of the table. Table brand equals to this, and then it's going to be fine, and then it's going to be like vstack. Then we're going to do this, okay, and then again filter TBL brand equals to D5 and something like this. Then we can say, yeah, but if or this one is equal to this and this one is equal to that, then consider table, otherwise do something like that, and then just go on and on and on. I don't like to work in this way. So this is something that I want to think about, right? I don't want to work with this. So I don't want to do something like this, because it's going to be very complicated to maintain. Then yes, of course, yeah, there is a vstack, then we need to use the indentation and whatever you like. But then you are going to put, I don't know how many of these solutions, and I don't really like that. But then it's up to you, right? But in this case, I understand, what I'm doing. Even in this case, I can just go back to let, and then I can already say let data TBL, and then you can say condition, and then you can say all of this, and then it's going to be okay. Then we can say final condition, and then it's going to be final. I don't know if I did this correctly. I probably forgot some stuff. Yeah, so you can see here, this is the same exactly as before. So I'm just playing a bit with you all, right? Because I'm creating something and then I'm recreating it, and once again. But if you think about the structure, it doesn't really change much, because in this case, I'm just taking, okay, the data is here, so we can do some other, some other stuff and everything else. Like in this case, I think it makes sense, because in this case, like even if you consider, yeah, this is a very good point. Deepak says, but they cannot be repeated. In this case, fortunately, it just takes it one time. If you do that on the other side, I agree with you. It could be twice, so you need to use unique. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Then, of course, I mean, everything can happen. It's a very valid point, I think. In that case, it shows why I don't think that it's a proper solution anyway. But anyway, so this is something that we can do, right? So then we can also say, okay, but what if we want to do something else instead? And I'm showing you what happens when we work with clients, right? So they always want to change something. So we already started from something that was like this, like a very quick thing. And then we are thinking about something that is already working with sequence, the rows, and whatever, because we want to be structured, we want to do stuff in a certain way. Then we can go on and say, yeah, but what if you want to sort them? So you want to say brand A, and then you want to say brand B. I mean, it's something that now we should be able to do, right? So you are going to use let, because in that way it's much easier, and then we can just use sort. So I can just copy the same stuff that we did before. Then we can say, okay, this is going to be something like that. Cool. These are different values, right? But you see that this structure is always the same. So we have the brands, then we have some space, then we have, I just put this to count how many functions do we have inside, but it's not something that we need to do, right? In this case, instead of being final, it will be final sorted, and then we will just say sort final by brand, so 2, and then we can say final sorted. And then you can say this is going to be Barilla, this is going to be Ben & Jerry, then it's going to be Breyers and whatever. Then of course you need to account for this. But even if you do something like this, then this is going to work because it's going to take all of them and they were already sorted before. But now, even if they weren't, it's already sorted. So here, then you can put a sort. Something that I was a bit struggling with was understanding a bit more on how you can sort stuff, right? Because with group by, we're now used to do this directly from filter. I think that it makes a lot of sense to say, yeah, but I want to see first sorted by something, and then I want to have another way to sort this information. I want, for example, to sort by another column. Like if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we want to count by this specific column as well, right? So we can do something like this. We can say that we want to say final sorted version 2. And instead of sorting by 1, we can say sort final, and then what? We can just say 2, and then 8. And then we can just say, okay, let's just see for each of these, I want to have first from A to Z the brands, and then I want to see the most important for storage first, right? So it's going to be 1, then -1, then sorry, -1, and then this is going to be our solution at the end. In this way, you're going to see that you have all the values, but they are sorted twice, because the 2 goes with the 1, and then the 8 goes with the -1. This is something that sometimes I struggle to remember, for example, but I think it makes sense. If you want to sort stuff, it's always better just to do this at the end. You can also put some conditions, of course, if you want to make this complicated. You can just say, okay, but you can put this, dynamic, and with Xmesh that can decide whether it's 8 or something else instead. You can put 1 and -1, and you can say if you want this from A to Z, and so put conditions so that this is changed. But anyway, the easier way is understanding that we're doing this in a certain way, and so this is all structured. In this case, if you're not using the final sorted, because this is not used afterwards, we can just delete it, and then we are going to have our solution. So you see that we are going to have multiple solutions, but the structure doesn't really change. If you start with a good structure, I think that you won't change that much, but you need to always think, okay, is this now the best way to do that? Am I thinking about some other solutions, and what can I do differently, right? So for example, you may have some other questions. For example, I want to select more than a brand from one single cell, one single individual cell. And it's not something that you cannot do, but my answer would be no. It makes no sense to me. It doesn't make sense. It's a very complicated thing, because you can do that, yes, but this is madness because this makes sense to me, right? So you can have multiple brands, but doing something like this doesn't make any kind of sense to me. You lose the option of selecting different brands, so you put everything together. So yes, we can play with this. We can use isNumbers, search, sequence, rows, isNumbers, Xmesh, textly, whatever. Okay, so we can show off. Yes, but this is not a good solution, right? Because in this case, if we have some people that just enter something different, for example, Pringle, disappear. If you put something else, like this, everything is going completely, bonkers. Why? Because we put a separator that is just a comma. So sometimes I know that it's not easy, but saying no is quite important. If it doesn't make sense to you, if it doesn't make sense from a structural perspective and it's not functional, you can just say no. You are the expert, you are in charge, they are paying you to do this stuff, right? So, okay, you can create the solution. Does it make sense? To me, it doesn't make any kind of sense to create something like this, because then if you want to create something more complicated, you're always going to have something completely crazy. So I don't know if this is something that makes a lot of sense, right? But I know that it makes sense to me, because in this case, if you want to create this formula, you don't need to show off that you're good in Excel. You need to show off that you can create the solution for them, and this is not the right way to go. So one of the ways in which you can actually survive with all the madness is just say no. No because of the deadline, no because it doesn't make any kind of sense. Just, talk some sense into them, right? In this case, I think it's quite important to just say no. And then we also may have some other solutions. The one that can be trivial, but it's actually fairly complicated, is how can I see just one of the stores? And here we go back to thinking, okay, but if we did with unpivot and then doing some pivot tables, then it will be easier. Yes, but if the client doesn't want to change, then we need to account for that in a certain way and saying, maybe if we want to see this data in a certain way, we can play around this, right? So this is going to get kind of complicated, because when we go back to the table, you see that we have everything, but we have, for example, Vancouver is here, and then we have some other data. We don't want to see the other data, and this is something very close to what happened to a case, with a client of mine. So they wanted to do this, and it wasn't really something immediate. So I'm going to share this with you. So we are going to use the headers as our compass. We're going to say, okay, let's start with the headers, and then we're going to use whatever we need to just make this work, right? So in this case, I added, as you guessed, Vancouver, but you cannot do the table headers trick, because of course now we have too much stuff, right? We don't care about some of this stuff, so we can change our approach. One of the first thing that you can do is basically say, okay, but what do I need to take inside? Like, what do I need to modify? And here, you can use, for example, take. Then you can say, I want to use the headers. So I want to do headers. Then I can just say 17, okay? And in this case, it's going to take what we want to use as fixed, right? So we don't want to modify this because it makes sense to us. These are the first 7. So up until cost, nothing is going to change, and this is okay. Then we want to do something else though. I can just copy this, but the tricky part is that we want to search inside of the headers when we find actually Vancouver, right? So we can do something like this. So we can say filter inside of the headers, and then we can say is number find if I were inside of the table headers. So in this case, if I show this to you, this is going to share with you that we are going to take everything in Vancouver, right? This is going to take STVM, that was the storage, threshold, and sales. If we say Denver, then this is going to change, right? So this is going to take different kind of values. So what we can do is basically combine the two and say, okay, we're going to change the headers, and then we're going to say HStack, take, and then filter. And so we're going to take everything that we need. So the headers are going to be dynamic now. So the structure changes, but up to a certain point, right? So we still have all of the values here. We still have the headers, but then, of course, the formula is going to be a bit more complicated now. Why? Because we need to account for what we did before. And here, I think that it makes sense to think about this in another way, right? So we can do this, and then we can play with this and say, okay, we can work with everything that we did. Just to speed up some stuff, I can just retake some of the stuff. We can say let data, it's going to be table, and then the condition is going to be the same one that we did before. So if for C5 equals to something, then D5 equals to something else instead. And in this case, it's going to be sequence rows of the table. And then if false, it's going to be count if. So we are basically replaying what we did before. But now we have some other changes. We need to think, okay, but we have the condition, right? But now we are going to change it, because we're going to say, I want to see the store. So the store is going to be E5. And so I need to play around this information with the store, right? So what I did with the headers is going to be replicated inside of the formula. So if I say headers, I'm just going to take the headers from our calculation. And then I want to say, I only want to see the headers of the store. So I can see headers, store, and I can filter the headers and then just say, is number. Then you can decide, what you want to do, whether to use search or find in this case, but we can use search instead. We can say store instead of the headers. And then we can just say that this is going to be the, the header store. Why? Because if we do header store, you're going to see that you have basically the same solution that you have before, right? So this is going to be the same that you have on the other side. Why do we need that though? We need that because in this case, we don't want to know which one it is. We want to take the information inside, right? So we can say, okay, we can say start. I can say start. There is somebody, but I'm not entirely sure if they want to ask a question. So start a sequence. So we say, okay, we can take the first 7 because basically we are going to replicate what we did with the headers. And then we say, okay, but the column store are going to be what? X match of what? Of the header store on the headers. Why? Because if you look into this, then now we know that these are the numbers that are the relative numbers, that we need. So we are going to say, we took all of this information and we say, these are going to be the numbers, that we need. So we have from 1 to 7 and then 9, 13, and 17. This is what we need, right? If we say Vancouver, these numbers are going to change. Very, very nice. Of course, this is a way where you can basically use let and just see what's going on, right? It's going to be much easier if you have multiple calculations because otherwise it gets complicated. So all the columns are what? We can say hstack, what? Start, and the column store. And what is this? If you do all call, this is just a combination of what we have. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it's dynamic, which is cool, which is what we want. So the final solution is going to be choose cause, what? To filter data, the condition, and then what? All call is what we want. And then this is going to be the final. And this is, of course, not working, but this is something that, I mean, it was a bit too easy to have everything working at the first level. So I'm pretty sure that I forgot some steps inside. Yeah, I put choose, for example, instead of, choose cause, which can be kind of problematic. Choose and choose cause, of course, is something different. Generally, I work with the Italian version with different delimiters as well. So I'm actually surprised that this happened only at the 7th step. But anyway, you can see that this works in this way, right? So you say this is the data, you have the condition, so this is the same as before. Now you have the store, and then you can define how tedious you want to be, how precise you want to be. But then you say, these are the headers, then you have the start, then you put them together, and then you just consider some of this stuff. Of course, if you just move all of this information around, then you're going to see that this information changes. So if you say, Denver, if you say, Miami, then this is going to change. Now, this makes it more complicated, yes, but just to show you, when you go to say, I want to use multiple brands, it's one thing. If you want to say, I want to use one store and you have different columns, then this is where you need to have some understanding on how to move inside of your file, right? Because with, choose cause, you can just say I only want a certain number of columns. And this is something that, for example, I use because that I want to do calculations inside. So in this case, yes, it's complicated, absolutely, but it's kind of easy to follow, right? So there's the condition, the others, and whatever. So this is something that we can play with. Then what can we do though? They are not that happy about it because they want to do something. They want to see only the filtered data. So they only want to work with the filtered data. And what I understand is that they want to use subtotal or aggregate in this case. Like they want to see some information. So what I can do, just to save some time, I can just copy this formula. And then I can go down. And then this is something that we can actually do in a different way. So we can say, okay, this is something that happens, right? So you have some information. How can I see the data? And how can I only see what I really want? So in this case, if you want to use the filters, I can basically play this with, some and everything else. If you need to leave at a certain point, just, be sure that we have also the recordings, so no worries about it. But thank you for having such an active chat as well. But in this case, I want to play with this. So I'm just saying, okay, this is the filter, very nice, but maybe I want to see all of this information. Some very easy stuff that I do is just, okay, I want to do the index of these values, and then I want to see the number 8. Why? Because it's going to be basically my sum, right? So if I sum this information, that this is going to be the same, and this is always going to be absolutely the same. If I want to change it, I can just say, okay, I can just play with some other formulas. I can just say, subtotal, for example. I can just say, subtotal. I want to sum the data, and then it's always going to be index of what we have here. So even in this case, as of now, this is the same. I can use aggregate, and this is something that you may want to do in different ways. Now, if you talk with my good friend Alan Murray, he will always go with aggregate. Sometimes it doesn't really change that much, but it depends on what you want to do. So if you say something like this, then it's going to be, I only want these values, etc. But this is where I put the data on the top. Why? Because I think that this makes sense, right? If you only want to see, for example, canned soup, you can just click on this, and then you're going to see that this value is going to change. So you know that this is all, like this is every data that you have, like all the stores summed together, and this is only like a small percentage. So the easiest thing that you can do is just to say, okay, if you want to filter stuff, you can just do that. It's not a problem. The formula won't change. So if you want to only see some other information, we can change, Barilla, Del Monte, okay, whatever we have. But you can put, I don't know, if you have separate stuff, but here you can go even for a single product. So it's actually very, very flexible. But if you say, okay, if we consider together two different brands and we only go for Barilla, the easiest thing that I do is just to say, okay, how much is this up until the total? And this is really the easiest thing that you can do. And then you just do 1 minus this value. And sometimes the crowd goes crazy just for something like this, right? So we don't need to go for very complicated stuff. Like we can just say, okay, but we can just do something like this. And then if they do something, like I can just move it around and then just make it a bit, smaller or whatever. And then you can just say, okay, but I want to know, this is, for example, okay, the 30%, okay, then this is going to be slightly different and something like this. So we can change the colors and whatever you want. But something like this, which seems trivial to us, is something that is, I think, very easy, but people really like it, for example. And it takes just a couple of, calculations or your site. I think that people go crazy inside of corporates, not because they hate pie chart scan. I know that we are not fans of this, but in this case, I think that it's a very quick win in case you want to show this kind of information. So I think that this is something very cool to show to people. But I get your point, though. But in this case, if you want to go for more complicated values and whatever, I think that it makes a lot of sense. So you can just see, whatever happens, and then this can be something happening. The last thing that I want to show you is this, right? So we can also have some other alternatives where they say, okay, but what about the turnover, right? So you can do probably calculations that we haven't done before. So for example, you could say, okay, I'm going to take all the information that I have, and then I'm going to change what's going to happen, right? So in this case, I can do that, because I can basically, copy what we had before, and then I can say, okay, I want to calculate this at the end. We can do that at the start inside of the table, yes, but we can also do this at the end. So if you want to reuse the formula as before, we can just say that this is what we need. And then we can just say, okay, but what can I do? Instead of just doing final, this is going to be slightly different, because they say, okay, the final price is going to be index final 06. So I'm going to say, I want to take the price from here. And then I'm going to say, okay, final sales. This is going to be take. I mean, I can do that, with index, but take is nice, because I can say take the last one. So the last column, because sales is always going to be the last one. If you use a store, then this is always going to be the last one. I didn't account if you want to select all stores, but it's the same concept as before. And then you can just say, okay, if you want to do like a recap, I can just say if error, and then I can just filter the final and say final price multiplied by final sales is at least this number. So you can see that we can add some values on the top. And then we can just say, okay, I just want to see, if this is wrong, then I can just say blank. And then I just want to see the recap at the end. Why doesn't this is different? Because if you put 1,500, this is going to change, right? This is going to do some other data. This is going to tell you among the products in my selection, these are the only ones that actually have more than this value, and it's a value that was not inside at the start, right? So we can calculate that, but it's going to be a bit different. Just for the sake of it, I can show you also another solution that is almost the same, but I think that it makes sense for you to see. I need to remember how I call this, but if you do something like this, and let's hope that this works, that it took everything correctly. Yes. Did it take it correctly? No, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about this. I wanted to show you how this is going to work in another way, but I'm not sure about this. But anyway, the good thing is that you can then play with that, and you can just select all the data and then modify what you want to do. So you can say, okay, but if I change it, then you can basically restructure the formula and then something else instead, right? So in this case, this is going to be completely different. So the good thing is that we got to the end of our solution. So we were able to actually gather everything that we have. We had all the data, and I can confirm that if you use Barilla, then the data is going to change. If you put 300, this is going to change, and whatever. This is something that we can also test, right? So if you say price multiplied by sales, then all of these numbers should be higher than 300. If you put 50, then you see that you have some other data, and then this shows that this is something that actually works, right? So even in this case, I hope that this is working up until 50. I think that there is something slightly different, but anyway, yeah. So the idea is that if you take something like this, so if you work with something like that, then this should take some information and then be able basically for you to modify all of these data, right? So in this case, this is going to take all of the prices, and then these are all going to be multiplied, and then this is going to give you some more information. So if you do something like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we can play with this and see what happens. Let me just try this back. Is going to be 100 or something like this, then it's going to be 300, then this is going to be slower, then this is going to be 500, and this is going to be 600. I'm not entirely sure on what I did before, but in this case it's 1000. If you put 1050, then these numbers actually kind of disappear. This is the good thing of doing stuff live. Sometimes you may have some conditions that give you some strange ideas. But anyway, the idea is you can go up until the end and then see what's going on. So you can actually restructure all the data and then see what's going on. What's the problem though of everything that I showed you? That we started from something that was very easy. So we started from something that was just, how can I filter by brand? And then we ended up creating like sort of a monster, right? So this is like very long formula. It takes a lot of information, and of course, yeah, this is cool, it's working, but it may be like an overkill. So if I say probably restructuring this with the condition can be a good idea, like for example putting all the conditions together instead of having two filters and whatever, but this is something that you can do at the end. How I want to close this presentation is that if you want to do something like this, then it's going to start easy, and then you're going to have something like this. So you start with something easy, but what they meant was they wanted to have a dashboard that can be filtered by one or more brands. I can choose one specific store. The structure should be simple. The dashboard can be sorted in multiple ways. I need to be able to filter it out. I want to look at the intermediate results. So I want to filter with aggregate. I want to create calculations that were and there at the start. So it's way more complicated, but the client will never ask you for something like this. So to be to run away from the madness, you need to have an approach. You need to have a way in which you can actually tackle these problems. Whether they are easy or not, it depends on the client, but I think that this is the way in which you can actually translate what they want to do and not get lost if you want to do something that is a bit more complicated. So thank you all for following the presentation. I think that I went a bit kind of, I think that I took a bit more time, but I hope that it was interesting. And thank you all for sticking also up until the end of the presentation as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Marco. Fantastic. Hey, I got some questions for you if you're open to them.
Sure.
So one of the questions that I'm always looking at when you're trying to build out your solution for your client, you're trying to scope these things out. And like you say, you've got your checklist, are you going to work with Office 365? Nope, you're not my client. If you're going to work with Mac, nope, send them to Mike. Like those kind of things. And that. You obviously focus a lot with dynamic arrays. What made you choose for this kind of a solution using dynamic arrays versus saying using a pivot table? because a lot of the stuff that you could have done, or you would have done here, could have been done with a pivot table in a tabular format using slicers and whatnot to make some of this stuff easy. So why did you choose to go dynamic arrays over a pivot table? And with that, does auto recalc coming to pivot tables change what that answer would be for you?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So in that case, it started because this specific client also wanted to take this information elsewhere. So they took a slice of what we showed, and then it was shown on another sheet. So in that case, it was much easier for me to play with dynamic arrays. You know that now we have the spill error with pivot tables and whatever, but that made stuff very complicated otherwise. You know that there are workarounds with that, but working with data that is inside of a pivot table is something that I really don't like to do. It gets very complicated very quick. It's very static, so I don't like to do that much. So that's why I chose to use, dynamic arrays. I agree with you. Like for some of the stuff that I showed, it would be just easy probably to just do something inside of a typical pivot table. One of the issues will be, for example, if you want to select based on something that is not there, then of course you can do that with measures and whatever, but I didn't want to overcomplicate stuff. The data set was not huge also, so I just had a few thousand of rows, so that was working.
I wasn't even thinking going into DAX or anything like that. I was just thinking like standard pivot tables, right? I mean, but regardless, I mean, you had your reasons. It was just a question I wanted to throw out there.
Yeah,
this is one of the things that I'm always trying to balance, obviously, when I'm doing my own client solutions, is like what technologies to use. You settle purely on one technology, or do you mix them, right? And do you say, well, for that sheet, I'm going to give you a pivot table. For this sheet, I'm going to give you a Power Query. For this sheet, I'm going to give you something different. The second question that I've got for you, and I didn't see this covered in your list of techniques, but or your list of evaluations, but the question is, and I've been I've been focusing on this with my recent client. How do you decide how deep in the technology to go, and what is that acceptable level of technical trickery that you can use in order to generate the solution? And I'll just give you some background on this one. I mean, in the solution that I'm building, the intent is when I'm done, I'm going to hand it to the client. It is their job to maintain. So now it comes into, are you open to using Power Query? Yes. How much skill do you have in Power Query? We've never used it before. Oh my God. So now how do I actually, so I'm going to give you some training on Power Query, but in order to do some of these things, of course, my brain is thinking really advanced stuff in order to be able to make things work so that they're future proof. How do you deal with, and I mean, I've heard a term for this. It's, what was it? It was most advanced yet acceptable, I think is the thing. Like, how do you make that balance? Or is this not a concern in yours because you're building a solution saying, here you go, and if you need any help with it, call me?
Yeah. So generally, what I tell clients is that I'm going to be available for a few months afterwards, just to be sure that nothing is broken, right? So in that case, I'm not creating anything new, but I'm fixing if anything is actually broken. In that regard, I find it easier with dynamic arrays because people, I think that they are a bit more scared of changing them. With pivot tables, this is just absolutely, bonkers. So they just move stuff around, and then, it doesn't work. And then if for example, if you reuse the data and then they change it afterwards, even if you tell them not to do that, then it gets more complicated. So it's complex. Like in my case, for example, with Power Query, I try to follow some of the best practices that I also learned from you, actually. But when you work with all the staging environment, when you try, for example, I try to use parameters as much as I can. I try to explain it to them, but then sometimes they really, it's a struggle to understand what they want to do with Power Query. I think that with dynamic arrays, it's easier because, as I mentioned, if they see something like this, generally they're kind of happy about it. You just add a few visual signals and it's okay. And I don't mind even if I need to create a Lambda for them. As long as I am using the Lambda, I won't explain what the Lambda does, but now with all the AI stuff coming in, I think that it has become easier to document also what you do. So for example, Power Query is something that I use all the time just to rename all the steps and then give them comments, etc. With the formulas, in this case, for example, it's just one single formula. So in some cases, I create documentation, I create slides where I put the explanation of the steps. In other cases, I put together a short video, something like this, but yeah, generally this is not a concern. My major concern is whether people actually then use it. Like something happened to me over the last couple of years. In multiple cases, people that call me from one company, I think that then they got frustrated with the company and they left the company after I submitted my work. So I'm pretty sure that they did something very good, but I'm not sure how many people are actually using it afterwards. So this is also one of the challenges. I think that people that come to me sometimes, they are kind of pushing for something very cool, but then sometimes they are not leaders inside of the organization. So expanding these tools gets complicated.
Yeah, for sure. I got to say, the one part of that I love, well, I mean, I enjoy all the conversation, Marco, of course, but I build complicated formulas so people are too terrified to change it that it won't get broken. If I can paraphrase that nicely, that's a beautiful thing. Don't use a pivot table; it's too easy. They'll mess that up. As I say, what's the worst thing you can do to any solution? Invite a user to use it because they'll mess it up, right? So, so I thought that was kind of an interesting one. But yeah, it's always an interesting balance. And I mean, I'm sure that everybody here that's been involved in a project, whether it's in your own organization or working as consultants, run into these kind of things. But I will say, certainly in one of the ones that I've been working with, I mean, this has been really front and center as I'm getting ready to hand this off and trying to figure out how to train these guys on the things that I'm doing. And I mean, it impacts your ability even when you're building the solution going, okay, well, do I just do this in a custom column, or do I do the 6 steps that would be required through Power Query so that they have the audit trail so they can maintain it on their own in future, right? And, you're sitting there going like, well, as a purist, I want to do it the fastest way possible, but as someone who's trying to build a solution that I can shift to somebody else, I need to make sure they can actually follow what's going on and connect the dots in case they need to maintain it themselves in future. So it's an interesting balance to play on those kind of things. But
absolutely.
Anyhow, listen, thank you so much for doing this, Marco. I really appreciate it. Fantastic to have you on our show here. And thank you everybody for coming and being part of this. We will get the recording up for the session in the next 24 to 48 hours. And don't forget that our meetups are open for signing up in 2026. It's hard to believe it's already the end of the year. So great presentation to finish our year, Marco. Super appreciate it. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a fantastic and safe holiday season, folks. And we will see you all in 2026. Till next time.
Yes, thank you all. Bye-bye.